Welcome to Blast from the Past podcast. We have a guest from us from beyond the grave today. Everyone give a warm welcome to Giacomo Antonio Domenico Michele Seconda Marino Puccini. Please, just call me Puccini. Okay, Puccini, it's great to have you here. Everyone, Puccini here has written the best romantic operas of all time. So tell us a bit about yourself. Well, I was born December 22nd, 1858. Right, and where were you born? In the beautiful town of Lucca, Italy. Right, who doesn't know that? We all know you grew up to be a famous opera composer, but what about your family? What did they do? Since the 1730s, my family had made a name for themselves in Lucca. 5 generations of composers and organists. Where did they work? Was it a freelancing, or were they more of a traditional, working for the aristocrats or the church? They worked for the cathedrals of San Martino. That was the religious heart of Lucca. So you had a good upbringing in the music industry, but did they think you were going to be a church composer too? Or did they know you were going to follow a different path? Yes, actually. They thought I was going to follow in their footsteps. Silly to think of now, they held a position for me when my father died and everything. Well, it's safe to say that didn't work out. Well, actually, even though I was a poor music student and didn't show any interest at all, my mother didn't give up on me. Got me a music tutor. By 14, I was an organist. I was composing by then. Wow, that is amazing. I couldn't even imagine doing that at 14. And what inspired you to write operas like La Boheme instead of staying the organist? My brother and I headed 20 miles to Pisa to see Verdi's Aida, and from then on, I was inspired. And from then on, you attended the Milan Conservatory? I did until 1883, my exit piece being something I wrote called Capriccio Sforcio. It was an instrumental composition. From then on, you've been composing operas, being a great success. What was the name of your first opera? La Vie. It was for a local competition. I'd say that was the start of my career writing opera. And then soon after that, you caught the attention of producer Giulio Ricordi, who showed a heavy interest in your opera. He saw La Vie and bought the rights for it right away, then commissioned me for another opera for La Scala. I couldn't believe it. La Scala was one of the most important opera houses in the country. What was the name of the opera that he commissioned you? Edgar was by far my worst work. I'm sure it's not as popular, but why would you say it's your worst work? I blame it on the libretto. It was weak compared to all of my other operas. Ricordi seemed to believe that too, because this wasn't the last time he had commissioned you for an opera. Even after the mess that Edgar was, Ricordi still had faith in my operas. Yes, with his help and financial aid, you went on producing your first commercially successful opera by the name of Manon Lescaut. It was played all over, brought me so much success, I've never been paid so handsomely for an opera before. And from then on, you went to compose hit after hit, the 3 big ones with the help of librettist Luigi Illica and Giuseppe Giacosa. The first of those 3 being La Boheme. Some might say La Boheme was my most influential work. Why did you write it? What was the inspiration for this great opera? It was based on my impoverished life as a music student. Where did you write it? I wrote it around my home, out on the street, anywhere a spark of inspiration came from me. What is the plot, the meat of the story, as some might say? The story of Mimi, the poor tubercular seamstress, and Rodolfo, a young poet, in the Latin corner of Paris, who lives in a garret with Marcello, a painter, Colleen, a philosopher, and Chenard, a musician. Could you give a basic summary of the plot? The best summary of the story that I can think of would be boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy and girl are reunited as girl dies in consumption in the boy's arms and the curtain falls. Mimi and Rodolfo share a scene at the beginning. What's that about? You can see towards the end of Act 1, Mimi and Rodolfo meet and fall in love on a cold Christmas Eve. Why is Mimi in the garret in the first place? Her candle was blown out, and she knocks on the door, asking for light. Mimi has a coughing fit and faints in his arms, but revives after Rodolfo sprinkles water on her face. Then she leaves, candle still bright, but returns immediately. Why did she return? I was getting there. She lost her key, and they must search for the key in the dark, since a gust of wind extinguished their candles. And this is when they fall in love? How exactly does the scene go when they realize the 2 of them are in love? When their hand touch, Rodolfo says, "How cold your little hand is," and sings about himself, his dreams, and his fantasies. Mimi responds with a poetic aria called "They Call Me Mimi." Under the spell of their newfound love, they join a duet and close the act. Why do you think this act is so widely recognized and influential? As far as the As far as the music goes, my sensuous melody casts a glow over the entire scene. Could it be said that your music has an improvisatory quality? Yes, with many fluctuations of tempo, the reflect changes the mood of the dramatic action. And what about the music dialogue between Mimi and Rodolfo? I alternate between speech light and melodic phrases. A light, touching phrase when Mimi walks in. Her coughing fit is accompanied by an agitated music, and fainting and oboe solo. When she returns, the touching phrase is back at a faster tempo. The two arias' beginnings are almost conversational, right? Yes, they turn slowly into each other, and then into a declaration of love to the end of the act. Rodolfo on his windowsill, a beautiful end to one of my favorite operas I have ever written, and certainly one of the most successful. Wow, it is truly a timeless piece that has influenced the works of many today and still lives on in many works, such as the Broadway musical Rent, which is loosely based on your La Boheme. The two other works that made you famous were Tosca and Madame Butterfly, which are based in Japan, correct? Correct. The two controversial in their own right. Tosca because of the novel it was based on, and Madame Butterfly because of how much it resembled my other operas. But critically acclaimed and money-making nonetheless. I like to focus on verismo, realism, a study of real people, a believable opera. Yes, and why did you think that your works in opera stood out amongst all the other romantic opera composers? I've always been said I have a marvelous sense of theater, known when to introduce new music to provide a smooth transition. I made melodies that were short and easily remembered, but also provided the intense emotion behind it. Used the orchestra to reinforce the difference between atmosphere, landscape, and mood. I like to paint with my music, tell stories through it that couldn't have been told by going to a play and listening to some actors recite a script. And like Verdi in his later works, you continue to close the bridge between recitative and aria, keeping the music flowing instead of breaking it and to introduce some dramatic change. Continuity and unity were the keys in my operas and compositions. Yes, of course, the reason that you stuck around so long that you're even with us now in the 21st century. Though my operas were great, my personal life was nothing but trouble. I had an affair with a married woman, then married her. She became angry at me for being involved with another woman, so she took it upon herself and terrorized our servant girl into killing herself. I sent the woman away. She'd been mad. So you weren't having affairs? I never said that. And another personal life, my operas were successes were declining as was my health. I was diagnosed with throat cancer, and shortly after, on November 29th, 1924, I passed away, before even finishing my opera Turandot. Yes, your other Asian-influenced opera. Well, even though you had died, your opera lives on in us. You're still performed all over the world today. So I just want to say thank you, and everyone give a hand for Puccini. Thank you, thank you. Now, studio audience, turn your page to 368 and let's listen to an excerpt from the Act 1 of La Boheme.